Welcome to the Living Fullness podcast. I'm Stina.
And I'm Father Burns.
And on this episode, we're going to have a chat about prenups, whether we're for or against them.
If you're new here, we chat about virtues, relationships, we make comments on the culture, and we discuss living the Christian life. We are very grateful to have you with us.
All right, prenups.
Prenups. There's a perfectly interesting conversation to be having. Okay. So what is it? What are we talking about with the prenup?
Well, let's start with saying prenups. We're talking about a legal agreement, generally around finances, assets, and so on, creating a kind of a division, if you will, in case there should be a separation that takes place. So on the surface, I think when we kind of look at it like that, it seems a bit like, well, that seems like a reasonable thing to do. And especially when we look at the statistics of what divorce and separation looks like in our culture, we know that, I think it's above 50% now of separation and divorce. That's a huge number. So it kind of makes sense that people would go, well, when we know that we're kind of half likely to make it through this relationship, well, let's look at how do we protect ourselves so that if this fails, which is 50% likely to fail, then I'm kind of looked after.
Yeah.
So it kind of on the surface seems like a really prudent way to go about thinking about what happens after you get married in case this thing falls apart. But I think the problem we have, one of the main problems we have with that is that we're already entering into this relationship then thinking about separation. We've already walked in going, well, when this thing ends, or in the very likelihood that this thing ends, this is how I'm going to take care of me. This is how we're going to make sure things stay fair, which I think is the wrong way to enter into a committed relationship like marriage. So then we have all sorts of questions around trust that comes out. Then it's, is this the kind of person that I can actually truly trust with every aspect of my life? Because the reality is when we walk into a marriage with someone, we don't just take that person for their strengths. So we don't just say, well, I like their kindness, I like the way they sacrifice, I like their determination and their humor. We're also saying, yeah, and I also take you for all your flaws as well. I take you for the things that, are your weaknesses and the things that annoy me. I hate that you snore. I take all of that. I take your wounds, I take your past traumas. I take all of that as part of the person I am choosing to love with all your strengths and all your weaknesses. That's when we can say, well, I commit to loving you for all of you, even on the days that you upset me, even on the days where you frustrate me, even on the days where you make me mad, or on the days that you even break my heart. I continue to commit to love you through that.
Absolutely.
So with that, then I think it also then says that's a huge risk.
Yep, absolutely.
I think that's part we can't run away from that. That's a risk.
That's right. Yeah.
So then from there, I think there's kind of two things that prenup then says. It says there's a part of me that believes my finances are more valuable than every other aspect of this relationship that we have. And therefore, I must take extra precaution, extra security and safety to protect these finances. So it's the finances or the assets that I remove from this relationship that I don't bring in to this relationship. Whether you consider that your strength or whether you consider that a weakness, that's the part that I'm not going to bring into this marriage. And it also says at the end of the day, I'm going to take care of me first before I take care of our relationship.
Yep, absolutely. This is actually one of the rare circumstances in which, as a priest, I am expressly instructed by the church to say no to a couple who are seeking marriage. So generally speaking, we're pretty open. A couple come for marriage, so long as there seems to be requisite maturity there, an openness to the sacrament. We're pretty willing.
Yeah.
But here, I'm instructed to say no. I can't marry you. I can't marry you until you guys are ready and willing to say, no, we don't want that prenup. We don't need that prenup, right? And and the reason for this is that, as you've already pointed out, there's this notion that the marriage is not going to be forever, meaning that the vows that they offer each other are deficient from the outset, because the whole point of the vows is until death do us part, right? So it's saying that no matter what, we're going to be sticking around with each other. And the only thing that's going to interfere with that is the reality of death, right? The prenup then is contrary to the covenantal reality of marriage. What I mean by that is that marriage is an image of our Lord's relationship with the church. In Ephesians chapter 5, the instruction to men is to love your wives as Christ loved the church. Well, how does Christ love his bride, the church? He loves his bride, the church, by laying down his life for her. And he does this with the explicit risk present that there are those who will not be grateful for his sacrifice. He does this with the explicit risk present that there are those who will reject him, who will go in for the unforgivable sin of the Holy Spirit, right? The sin of final impenitence, of final separation from God. That's the risk that he takes, is that he gives everything with the prospect of nothing in return. That is the ultimate risk that he has taken, and he has taken for love of us. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that we should just love anything and anyone.
Right.
No, because otherwise our hearts will be wrung. Right?
Yeah.
That's not the point. The point is that the manner in which we love ought to reflect the selfless manner in which Christ loves, in which he gives himself entirely, in a certain sense, risking his very self, right? And it's almost like the divine gamble, isn't it? It's sort of, and in that way, we too have to be willing to take a risk and to love as Christ loves, to actually give of ourselves entirely, knowing that there is always risk involved, that things aren't always going to be easy, that things will be hard and they will be difficult. And that's part of what love is enduring the difficulties and the hardships. So yes, there is risk here, but the covenant of marriage says, I'm going to give myself to you, everything that I am, and I'm going to do that without reserve, as Christ did. And this is why it is so contrary to that covenantal nature. It's that a covenant, for it to be established, requires someone to give entirely. Because we're not talking about just a mere contract here. We're talking about a covenant established between two persons by the giving of oneself in imitation of the Lord Jesus Christ. So for this reason, it's completely contrary to the covenant that is meant to be established between man and woman in the sacrament of marriage. And therefore, I cannot marry two people who have got a prenup, because it says from the outset, no, I'm not giving myself entirely.
Yeah.
I don't intend for this to be forever. I don't intend this to be a forever kind of love. It says from the outset that I'm not willing to enter into the risk that love requires. Yeah.
Thinking about a couple of spaces, like thinking more about the trust part of why I think people may opt for a prenup. I think there's also this belief that sits behind that says something about trust being almost like this permanent feeling that can't be repaired, or like something that cannot be repaired. So I'm thinking in the case of infidelity, which is probably one of the spaces that most people can recognize would be one of the hardest wounds for a couple to heal from, is if one person was unfaithful, if there was an affair involved. We would say trust has been broken in that regard. And so kind of walking into a relationship with this trust piece then and wanting to protect that piece, it almost has this sense of, I believe that once my trust is broken, it cannot be repaired.
Yeah.
And so because trust cannot be repaired, I have to do what I need to protect the things that would be broken, that would be too expensive for me to have broken, which includes, everything that would be involved in a prenup. But I think that's a false belief to start with. I think it's false to say that once trust has been broken, it cannot be repaired, because the reality as a therapist is I've worked with couples who have had affairs, who have sat in my office and said, I don't know that we can come back from this. And I sit there with them going, I get that. I get that you believe right now that you're not sure whether you can bounce back from it. Now, I can't tell what's going to happen in 10 years from now, whether you will bounce back from it or not. But I can tell you if you don't try, you won't know. So all I can do is give them tools to be able to try and rebuild that trust if they want to and if they are ready to. But that includes a whole host of repair that has to happen before that. And all of that is possible because trust is based not on a feeling, but it's based on a series of behaviors. That's where we can build trust in a person. It's not like if trust was just a feeling, I could trust a stranger because it just depends on how I feel. It has very little to do with how that other person actually behaves, but that's not the reality of trust. It actually is about the relationship and about behavior from one person to another and that person reciprocating it. So yes, it can actually be repaired. So instead of creating a prenup to try and build trust, how about we go a less expensive route and just strengthen the relationship instead? Whatever's getting in the way that's making us even question why I need a piece of paper, a legal document that's going to protect me, what are you worried about? What are those insecurities and fears that are coming up? What is getting in the way of strengthening that trust between those two people?
100%. 100%. And look, that very point of trust that you're bringing up, the very nature of a prenup is that it declares, as you say, from the outset, it declares, I do not trust you.
Yeah.
Right. So it starts with that faulty presumption. And without trust, a covenant is impossible.
Or at least I don't trust you completely.
Yeah.
Because I think that could be jarring. Like I think some people could hear that and go, but I do trust them. Like I wouldn't be in a relationship with this person if I didn't trust them. But do you trust them completely?
And I think that's where I would say you don't trust them.
That's what I mean. Like it comes down to the language of what we mean when we say that. Do we trust them with pieces or do we trust them as a whole?
Yeah. And with a friend, with say a low level friendship, you can do that. You can trust a friend with a piece.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. But when you're talking marriage, no. This is the giving of oneself entirely. So there is no trusting with pieces. It is the trusting of oneself.
Yeah.
So if you're not ready to do that in the context of marriage, you do not trust them. That's like I know I'm sorry, that sounds harsh. It sounds harsh, but it's true. It's true. And so it's without trust, without the trust of being able to give oneself, a covenant is impossible. Now Christ gives himself, takes the ultimate risk. He's God. He sees all things. He knows all things. We don't. We don't. We don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
So it's we need that trust, right? And a prenup sort of says, my love for you is deficient, and vice versa, because I'm refusing to give. There's something that I am holding back. There is something I don't want you to have. There is something I'm not willing to trust you with. And so from the outset, if trust is not there, the love is going to be deficient. It's not the level of love that belongs to a married couple. It's just not.
Yeah.
Where there's a lack of, and the essential reason for this is that where there is a lack of trust, there will always be a natural unwillingness to risk. There will always be there will not be the willingness to take on the other person, to take on all that it means to love this person with all of their foibles and strengths, with all warts and all, as we would say, right? That risk just isn't there.
Well, it wouldn't make sense, would it? It wouldn't make sense to take a risk that's bigger than the level of trust that you have in that person.
Right.
Because that's just asking for heartache, isn't it? Isn't it just
absolutely, precisely. And I've seen situations where marriages have fallen apart, things get messy, particularly where money is involved. And the presumption is that the prenup would have fixed all of this. That's simply not true. Perhaps it would have fixed a legal mess. Perhaps it would have fixed a legal mess.
In the aftermath.
Right? But you'd still have the worst mess to deal with of a broken relationship. I'm reminded of C.S. Lewis's. I've quoted this many times before on this podcast, but it's always worth bringing up again. C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves, he says that love this side of the veil always entails risk. And that he says, if you love anything, your heart will be wrung out, right? So you must be discerning about what you love. And he says that if we aren't willing to risk love, if we lock up our hearts in a sort of a coffin of our own self-protection in a certain sense, then we think to ourselves, oh, well, our hearts won't change. They'll remain the same, protected. He says, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. The heart will become cold. And he says almost irredeemable. Not fully irredeemable, but almost to the point of being irredeemable because it will not risk. And he says that the only place outside of heaven where we can be safe from all the dangers and perturbations of love is hell. Because in hell, there is no love, right? So, C.S. Lewis, Clive. So we've without that willingness to risk, without that willingness to trust, a married relationship just doesn't exist.
Yeah. So how do we kind of move forward, I suppose, like even thinking about how can we kind of use this information in our own lives? I would suggest instead of investing in lawyers, invest in your relationship. So if that means like you have to go to a therapist, then go to a therapist. Like honestly, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Worthwhile.
Exactly. If it means that you have to put some money aside maybe just to be able to like go away on holidays together, to be able to actually have quality time together, do things together, explore and keep the marriage going well, then do that. Like again, much less inexpensive than separation. So
100%.
Invest in that. But also for those people who aren't married yet, pre-marriage counseling.
Yeah.
Like it's not I know that a lot of people, certainly a lot of the ones that have come through for me or that I've spoken with, have often felt like pre-marriage counseling is just the thing they have to do because their priest told them to do it. Like it's another ticker box.
Yep.
Well, Father said I have to go and do this thing so that I can have a certificate to show him that I've done it. Like just, can we just do this thing? Yeah, okay, you could do this thing, but let's talk about some of the benefits of this because it actually, pre-marriage counseling, taking the time to get to know what your relationship dynamics are like, actually helps strengthen your relationship and has shown, the program that I use certainly has shown a 30% decrease in chances of separation.
Hey, that's cool.
I'm sorry, with a 50% chance of separation at present, wouldn't you want to take any means for an additional 30% that it's not going to happen?
100% yes.
That seems like a win.
Yes, absolutely.
So just get like, do the stuff. Do the stuff. Do the work.
Yep.
It's worth doing the work.
It is interesting. You mentioned that stat a few times of a 50% divorce rate.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Mario Sacasa and Dr. Mario had a fellow on, I forget his name. It's terrible, sorry. But a recent episode of his podcast, Always Hope, he was actually making the point that at least in the US, the 50% divorce rate is not a true statistic. And I don't know if it's the same here. I'm not sure. So in the States, it was put forward as an estimate, and the estimate was actually grossly overestimated.
Yeah.
It's sitting somewhere around the high 30s or 40s.
Yeah. We have to take into consideration too that at the moment, we actually don't have many marriages happening. There's a decline in marriages.
Yeah, sure.
So when I say the rates that I'm saying, I'm also saying marriage and separation.
Yeah, sure.
So we're not just talking about people who are
divorce
getting
per se.
No.
Yep. Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, no, and certainly also a worthwhile podcast to
Definitely,
listen
definitely.
to as
Always
well.
Hope. Listen to it.
Yeah.
Listen to ours first, but then listen to Always. No, I'm sorry, just kidding.
No, huge fan of Dr. Mario Sakasa, so go listen to his stuff.
Absolutely.
But I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge when it comes to prenups is the reality of financial stress. It is one of the primary stresses of relationships. We know that. We know that money means different things to different people. And money seems to have a kind of weight in relationships that causes friction in relationships. So what a prenup kind of does then is go, well, let's hash this thing out now before we get into a relationship, because we know this thing is probably going to cause some havoc. So why don't we just figure out how we would manage this if and when the relationship falls apart, so we don't have to deal with the uncomfortable of this part of it when it, and if it comes up in a relationship, which is really just symptoms. It's just treating a symptom instead of getting to the root cause of what's going on.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't it be better to actually go, what is the reason why money is so stressful for this relationship that I'm in? And why couldn't we just figure that out? Why couldn't we figure out what money means to us, what money means to each one of us individually, what it means to us as a couple, how we use it, why we might have some anxiousness around it, and then work through that together, because then you can turn what was an anxious part into a strength of your relationship, which will not only benefit the relationship that you're in, but also the children that might come from it. Because now we've treated the problem rather than the symptom, which means that the next generation won't have to keep suffering the same symptoms that we've had to carry from previous generations.
Absolutely. And it's sort of there's a. It also speaks about where one's hope is, doesn't it? Because it's if my focus is on the protection of my money, right, then my hope is not so much in this relationship, but my hope is in the out. My hope is in the out clause that we have, that if things go wrong, here's what's going to get us out, right? And whereas to say, well, my hope's invested in this. And so let's work on it. Let's work on it, and if there's problems about money, let's talk about those problems and let's sort it out, and let's get our hope based in Christ and ordering this relationship towards the Lord. That's where our hope's going to be. I think as a bit of a scriptural reflection, Matthew 6:34. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. A prenup is often born of anxiety and, as we said, a lack of trust. And so where there is that stress or that anxiety, remember, you don't need to worry about tomorrow. God's got that. Where there's a lack of trust, be asking, why? Does it make sense? Is there a reason for it? Again, there's that prudence that we were talking about in a previous episode. Is being able to determine, well, why does that exist? And what am I going to do about it? Rather than ruminating on it, make it something that we're like, okay, let's attack this as a couple. Let's go to pre-marriage counseling. Let's go to marriage counseling. Let's just not be victims of circumstance.
Yeah. So it's probably a few different kind of mindsets, if you will, or common arguments, if you will, for prenups. And I think one of those we've just mentioned before about digging into the deeper reason for why this is happening, the anxiousness that might come about, or which really is all just a fear-based, a fear of maybe being abandoned, or a fear of, some level of dependence, or that there might be some exploitation, or even like loyalty piece, which is coming back to trust. All of that is, prenups is just a way to try and mitigate that anxiousness. So getting to the root cause of that would be a much better way to move forward. But it's also, we can also sometimes walk into relationships, if we have this prenup idea in mind, to look at the financial assets that I bring into this relationship is a much bigger strength than what my partner brings into this relationship. So I actually have bigger reasons to create a legal contract to protect what I bring in, because it's of more value. It's more important. So then we're kind of elevating money to a much higher degree than other parts of our relationship, which I think becomes a problem, because then we've stopped looking at what is the greatest value of being in a married relationship? Is it not to be that image of love that you spoke about before, Christ's love?
Yeah.
Is it not to be that? And is the goal of marriage not to help one another get to heaven?
Yeah.
Have we put financial security above that kind of a goal? And then we have, feminist arguments as well. So we have the ones that will say, well, actually women need to protect themselves because women walk into marriages, they have children, they've got no income of their own. So it makes sense for a woman to walk into a prenuptial agreement because it means that she walks away financially able to manage. But again, I think this one is also a bit scary because now we're saying that women are entering into relationships with men who may walk away.
Yep.
Don't even get married.
Right.
Don't even, why are we in relationships with men who do that? Like, why are we okay with walking into relationships with men that we think are going to abandon their wife and children?
Right.
Just don't even enter into that kind of relationship.
Right. And it's that trust piece and that risk piece, and one has to exist for the other to exist. Yeah. So in terms of money and assets, then I'd point to Luke 12:32-34. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Where's our treasure? What do we value? Are we wrapped up in ourselves or in greed, or are we willing to let it go and allow God to show us the true nature of love? Are we willing to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of those that we love? So, just to give a bit of a summary, I suppose, of the episode, don't do prenups.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a good summary of what we just said. Don't do prenups.
Oh, yeah.
If you've just skipped to the end of the episode, that's what we basically said.
Yay or nay?
So
Nay.
nay, I tell you, nay. So don't do prenups because they essentially stop a true, genuine covenant love from being formed between man and woman. Regardless of the excuse, it's always to the detriment of the marriage. So yeah.
Don't do prenups, do other stuff instead. Like prepare your relationship instead. So it's not like don't do prenups and then don't do nothing. It's don't do prenups but keep working on that relationship.
I love it. Very good. All right. So
Truth, beauty, goodness.
Truth, beauty, and goodness.
For me this week, it was a new recipe that I tried. I had someone over for dinner recently and I made like just some little chocolate and seed type little treat for dessert.
Ooh.
And I took the rest of it to work because I can't eat it. So I was like, I'll just share it with people at work, not expecting for how many people to love it.
Yeah.
So I had about 5 people come up and be like, Stina, can I have the recipe for that? I was like, oh, okay.
I tasted that.
Yeah, you
I
did.
tasted that.
Yeah.
And that was good.
Yeah.
That was
Healthy
good.
snack.
Healthy snack, man.
Yeah.
Healthy snack.
Yeah. So I'm all about it. Send me
Oh, that was
recipes if you've got
delicious.
healthy snacks.
I can still taste it.
Oh, okay.
I
All
can
right.
still,
I'll get you some.
like just when you put it, I'm just like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was some good food.
Oh.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'm salivating. That's not good. So for me, it's actually a journal that I commend to anyone and everyone. Nova et Vetera. It's a theological journal. It's heavy hitting. It's I'm not going to lie, but it's a well worthwhile journal. And in particular, an article from a guy named Mariusz Belinjovic. I've probably destroyed your name. I'm sorry if you're listening. I genuinely apologize, Father. He's a priest, and he wrote a brilliant article about the universal call to holiness, which is in our Second Vatican Council, Lumen Gentium, talks about the universal call to holiness, that everyone's meant to be holy. And he links that with a document called Veritatis Splendor, the splendor of the truth, which John Paul II wrote. And really, really beautiful, very insightful, helpful to get a sense of the fact that I am called to be holy. and that my first task is to be a saint and to overcome the sins and the darkness that exists in my own life. So yeah, that's what's going on there. That's my truth, beauty, goodness.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of Living Fullness. We will catch you again next week. But until then, know our love and bless.
God bless.